It's really nice to have all of you here today. We started off today with Len Monheit giving us an overview of prebiotics and the consumer insights into it. And then he went on to talk about trends and opportunities as well, which gives us a great foundation in where we went through today. We started off with Mallory talking about our latest prebiotic, butyrogen, and then Derek talking about sun fiber. We just heard David talking about two of our other prebiotics, Tricilium and Eldamune. Our main focus throughout the presentations were on gut health. And but on the other hand, everybody did go through and talk a little bit about it's beyond gut health into the gut-brain axis and even beyond that. And I want to talk a little bit more about that today and share with you some science and some mechanisms connecting the gut to the brain. So I'm going to go to the next slide, which is talking about what exactly the gut-brain axis is. Well, if we put aside foods and supplements and we just look at what happens in the body itself, there is a connection between the gut and the brain. And this communication, actually, you'll be surprised, actually works in both directions. The gut influences what happens in the brain, and the brain influences what happens in the gut. And there are two basic pathways for this. We've got the vagus nerve, which is the main nerve connecting the gut to the brain. And in there, we've got our nervous systems that are taking place, that are being the channels for the transfer of information from the gut to the brain. In addition, then, we have the circulation, the immune circulating system, the endocrine system, and the neural pathways in general that allow for gut-brain communication throughout the circulation, through the blood, and through other means, through the gut, through the blood-brain barrier into the brain. So we've got all these things happening, and would be our natural responses to stress, to the cognitive support through the gut and through the gut-brain axis. Now let's take it a little further and try to understand in more details what's happening. Why is the gut so important, and what is the effect of the microbiome, the bacteria that are present in the gut, on the gut-brain axis? So it really started in 2004. This study in mice was sort of the pivotal study that showed that there's a connection between the gut and the gut bacteria and the response to stress, which is what's happening in the brain. And you see this term HPA axis. It's the glandular system, the hypothalamic, pituitary, and adrenal systems that are behaving here. And what these scientists did was to use germ-free mice in one set of experiments, and then mice that were grown with bifidobacterium, a commonly used gut bacteria, and then finally with E. coli and other negative effect bacteria that are pathogenic in nature. And what they found was that the mice were germ-free, there was really very little connection between the gut and stress. But once the mice contained a bacteria that is commonly used as a probiotic, for example, you tend to see the response being exaggerated. And then on the opposite side, when they used E. coli, which is a pathogenic bacteria, you saw a reduction in the connection between the gut-brain axis. And this whole story led to the concept of the microbiome as being critical for the gut-brain axis. So then it opens up the question, you've got endogenous bacteria that are present in your gut since birth, that have grown in your gut, that are dependent on your lifestyle, on your environment in which you live in, on your diet as well. And you have these bacteria that are playing a role in the gut-brain axis. In addition, then, the next step is, can we influence the gut-brain axis? And that's first started with probiotics, bacteria that you would ingest that would colonize and grow in the gut and influence the gut-brain axis. Following that interest in probiotics, the next step obviously is in prebiotics, because the prebiotics feed the probiotics. They feed not only the exogenous probiotics, these are the probiotics that you would consume, but also the endogenous bacteria that are present in the gut and grow in the gut. And so it is this sequence of events, going from understanding that there's a connection between the gut microbiome and the brain, to probiotics and understanding their effects, to prebiotics and understanding their effects, and then to the postbiotics, which are the metabolites of the probiotics and their effect on gut-brain axis. So we're going to explore that a little bit more in detail. So if we go back for a minute to the central nervous system, there are a couple mechanisms that are involved through neuroimmune pathways and neuroendocrine pathways that usually involve the vagus nerve. And we talked about this earlier, and those are innate, inherent to us, to our body. What is enhanced through prebiotics and then the generation of postbiotics is small molecules, metabolites, such as the short-chain fatty acids, the secondary bile acids, and tryptophan metabolites. These small molecules communicate from the gut to the brain, and we're going to talk more about these. And they primarily act through certain cells that are present in the gut, on the villi that are in the gut lining. And Derek showed a picture when he was talking about sun fiber, showed a picture of these villi that are sticking out into the lumen, into the gut itself from the lining. And it's these enteroendocrine cells and enterochromaffin cells that are the place where a lot of this action takes place between these small molecule signals and then the effects on the brain and other organs in the body, which we'll talk about later. And then some of these small molecules can also cross the blood-brain barrier themselves and thus affect the action in the brain. So let's talk about, you've heard so much today about short-chain fatty acids. Let's talk about the short-chain fatty acids. They are the major signaling molecules mediating the responses in these cells. So you have these these cells that are lining the gut here, and the small molecules then interact with receptors on these cells, which then send signals up to the brain. And we're going to talk about some of these receptors. And actually, all of the short chain fatty acids, acetate, butyrate, and propionate, modulate this effect. But we see most of the modulation with butyrate, and we're going to talk more about that. So let's go right into butyrate's role in the gut-brain axis and the communication and the effects of butyrate in modulating the crosstalk between the gut and the brain. So there are a number of specific receptors on the cells that we talked about, the EEC and ECC cells that are present in the gut. And these receptors then will generate other molecules in order to communicate with the brain. And one of the molecules that's important here is serotonin. And you've all heard of serotonin as a brain modulating ingredient. So butyrate itself modulates serotonin production at the cell site. These are the butyrate molecules coming onto the receptors at these cells, and then modulating and enhancing the activity and generating serotonin, which then communicates up through the circulatory system and attaches to other receptors on the vagus nerve and communicates up to the brain. So it's quite a complicated system of communication here, and it's true for very many body functions where it is not just one thing that's happening, it's a cascade of events that's happening to modulate the effects. So there's also, if you remember, when Mallory talked about modulation of the mechanism of action of butyrogen, there are these histone deacetylases, the HDACs, that modulate the system. And I want to go more into detail here because it talks to how it affects the brain itself. So very much in the same way as we saw with serotonin production, you also get dopamine production through these receptors and these modulators. And again, you're all familiar with dopamine as an important small molecule that affects the activity of the brain, affecting stress and affecting cognition. So butyrate itself also affects dopamine production and the cascading effects on the system. So that's kind of a general description of the cascading effects of butyrate. So I wanted to talk a little bit about G-coupled protein receptors. These are receptors that are present in a lot of cells, and in fact, they are the main types of receptors that butyrate interacts with. You heard the term free fatty acid receptors, this FFAR2, FFAR3. These are butyrate receptors that are in the family of these G-coupled protein receptors. They're found in 80% of the cells in your body, not just on the lining of the gut, but in other areas as well. And we're going to expand our thinking here, not just to the gut and gut effects of butyrate, but also the gut-brain axis, but also even beyond that to other organs and other systems. And it's these key receptors, the G-coupled protein receptors, that are responsible for this behavior. So what does this all mean? Well, butyrate is not just a short chain fatty acid postbiotic for gut health. I think that's becoming very clear. We talked a lot about it throughout this webinar series, but it's also a part of tremendous amount of research going on right now to try to get to see this effect. So it is butyrate is the key signaling molecule. And what it means is that we can understand that prebiotics modulate the endogenous bacteria and exogenous bacteria, which are probiotics. They will produce butyrate and affect not only gut health, but brain health as well in many of the areas of brain health that we study today. Focus, how we are able to maintain our focus when in an activity, when there are other factors affecting our environment. Attention to detail, attention to the activity that we're focused on. Executive function has to do with memory and moving memory in our minds from different places, from short-term memory, long-term memory, and how we bring back the memory and use it in our daily activities. Stress and anxiety. And of course, this is a big area of interest today. People, all of us want to reduce our stress. And as a society, we definitely want to reduce our stress and anxiety in our daily lives. Cognition is more a general overterm for all these focus, attention, and executive function activities, which cover all of these as in one category. And related into this is sleep as well, where sleep is a really important part of cognition and stress reduction. So it's all of these factors that benefit from the gut through these mechanisms that we talked about today. So is this all? No, it's not all, but we're going to just connect these dots first so that we can see where it all goes. We've got the prebiotic, which affects the microbiome, which are the endogenous bacteria in our body, and probiotics, which we can consume, which are called exogenous. They come from the outside of the body. These then will generate butyrate, which is a postbiotic. And you also learned today that butyrogen is unique as a prebiotic. It bypasses the microbiome and generates butyrate directly. Butyrate is involved in signaling and transportation of messages to cell receptors, and we talked about different kinds of cell receptors and how then they communicate through dopamine and serotonin to affect brain function. So these are the dots that link everything together. And it's an exciting area of research today and continues to develop and expand. But there's more than that. There's more than just the gut-brain axis. And one of the things I mentioned is that 80% of the cells in our body have butyrate receptors, these G-coupled protein receptors, the FAR receptors. And because of that, there's an intense amount of research going on in university labs, in research centers, to look at the effect of these postbiotics and how they're messaging to the skin, to inflammation, to our metabolism, through to thermogenesis, how our body uses energy, to oxidative stress. You heard a little bit about that today, the general category of anti-aging, but then the specific areas of the liver, the lung, the kidney, and the thyroid. All of these organs are affected by our influenced by butyrate and the postbiotics and the messaging that occurs here as well. There seems to be some interesting research being done now that's linking these messages also to the persistent symptoms of COVID-19, long COVID. And I think you're beginning to hear more and more about these as we have large numbers of people that have persistent symptoms and what can be done about them, and perhaps through these messages. There's also some research that's been done showing a synergism with vitamin D. Vitamin D is such an important vitamin. It has multiple effects in the body. And one of the beautiful things today is that you can actually test for yourself for vitamin D. And there is some research showing a synergism between the metabolites such as butyrate and vitamin D. And finally, there's a gut health axis that's related to cardiovascular support as well through the bloodstream, through the butyrate generation. So there's a huge amount of research that's being done in all these different areas. Experts and researchers in each of these areas are trying to find out these connections and understand the mechanisms between what's happening. And so you start with these mechanisms. You start with studies that are being done in vitro and in animal models, connecting the dots here. And then finally, hopefully, we get to clinical research that demonstrates effects in the human body. So this is all really exciting. It's live as we speak right now. The research is being done right now. But you know, as usual in our industry, we tend to get ahead of the research and want to be able to use these ideas and influence the direction and formulation of dietary supplements to help consumers, especially the younger consumers, who should be and who want to be looking at their health in the long term. And this is one way to do that. Well, I hope this webinar series has been helpful for you and that you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take some questions.